Hello and welcome. One of the purposes of this channel is to expose the illusions that we live under, which we often take as self-evident until we start examining them. And this is exactly what we do when we examine how the mind attaches subjective meaning to objective reality, according to Robert Anton Wilson. You see, if you observe yourself, if you are like most people, you will notice that your mind has a way of attaching subjective interpretations to your experiences, and often makes these interpretations just as real as the events that spark them. These interpretations are often value judgments such as right, wrong, good, evil, shameful, praiseworthy, etc. Interpretations that you will not find a trace of if you simply try giving an objective description of whatever event, thing, person, phenomenon, etc. that you are experiencing and interpreting at the moment. There is a reason why we are spelling things out the way we are doing right now. The aim is to give you as clear a picture as possible of what we are talking about, so that you have as much chance of moving from a theoretical understanding toward applying it to your particular experience. Next, if you want to see what drives these interpretations, you will find such factors as your identity, belief systems, attitudes, unconscious beliefs, past experiences, and your reactions to these experiences. All previous data and interpretations of this data, whether accurate, inaccurate, or improvable, create the framework for how you interpret what is currently present in your life. And in this way, the mind stays in the known. When we step into this topic through Wilson's work, what we are really stepping into is a shift in how we understand the link between mind and world. Wilson spent decades examining how nervous systems build reality from signals, assumptions, learned patterns, and semantic filters. He did not mean this as metaphor. He meant it as a literal description of how a human nervous system operates every moment of the day. According to him, what we call meaning is not something discovered out in the world. It is something projected, edited, and stabilized through what he called reality tunnels. A reality tunnel is simply the automatic way your mind filters a flood of signals into a world that feels coherent, familiar, and meaningful. Once you understand this, the difference between an event and your interpretation of it becomes clearer. You no longer confuse your inner reactions with the nature of the event itself. Wilson often emphasized that the human nervous system never gives you raw, objective data. Instead, it gives you what it has already interpreted, edited, and woven into the frameworks it imprinted earlier in life. And once these imprints settle in, they shape how you process everything that follows. This is why so many of your evaluations about reality feel obvious and unquestionable. They are not questioned because they were installed before you learned to question anything at all. Wilson describes the nervous system as containing both a thinker and a prover. The thinker entertains ideas, and the prover finds evidence to confirm whatever the thinker has accepted. This is not presented as a moral flaw, but as a structural feature of the nervous system. Once a belief settles into the system, the prover will scan experience, memory, and perception to validate it. The more emotionally charged the belief is, the more rigidly the prover will lock onto confirming evidence. From Wilson's point of view, this is how meaning attaches itself to reality. A belief enters the nervous system, and the system begins creating a world that matches it. This happens whether the belief is supportive, limiting, imaginative, fearful, or outdated. This is something to think about. If the mind and the nervous system come with a built-in mechanism that seeks to confirm what we already believe to be true and in line with our identity, especially if it was instilled in us before our critical faculties were developed, how certain can we really be about our beliefs? How certain can we be of our judgments? What is striking in Wilson's approach is how little emphasis he places on the supposed solidity of the outer world. He does not deny that something exists outside the mind, but he argues that what we take to be the real world is always filtered through language, neurological wiring, past conditioning and emotional associations. You are not experiencing the world directly. You are experiencing a translation made by your nervous system. And that translation is shaped by everything you have absorbed until this moment, including what you absorbed without knowing you absorbed it. This leads to one of Wilson's central points. Meaning is not in things. Meaning is in the interaction between a nervous system and signals. What you call good, bad, threatening, safe, humiliating, inspiring, or significant is not located in the event itself. It comes from the way your nervous system has learned to label and categorize. These categories are built from imprints, words, social expectations, and previous interpretations that were never questioned. Wilson's writing encourages you to see that these categories are not absolute truths. They are habits of perception. Once this becomes clear, the link between subjective meaning and objective reality changes. You realize that your mind is constantly selecting from the chaos of raw signals and shaping them into something that feels organized. Wilson often compared this to the function of a model. A model helps you navigate, but it is not the territory itself. The trouble begins when a model is mistaken for the territory, which is what many of us do. We mistake our interpretations for facts. We mistake our emotional memories for direct perception. We mistake our meaning-making habits for features of the world rather than features of our own minds. Wilson's idea of the reality tunnel points to a simple but transformative insight. Every person lives in a world constructed by their minds, even if we at least have to live as if what our minds show us corresponds with a reality outside of our minds. Then again, according to teachings on what is called mentalism in the West, the only thing that truly exists is one mind on which everything else is projected, and this is much less far out than one might imagine at first. Check out the end screen for a video on this, as it is taught in the esoteric classic, the Kybalion. Now, what we are talking about here is not relativism in the sense of anything goes. Rather, it is a description of how perception actually works. The sensory data coming into the eyes, ears, and skin is not the experience. The nervous system edits and scripts the experience before you ever become aware of it. And because this editing is done automatically, the result feels like a direct encounter with truth. But it isn't. It is an encounter with the world shaped by the imprints and assumptions that your nervous system already carries. Another key element in Wilson's work is that he does not frame this as something unfortunate or negative. He frames it as a useful fact. If the nervous system is capable of creating meaning, then it is also capable of revising meaning. If meaning is a construction, it can be reconstructed. This is where Wilson connects the psychological with the neurological. In Prometheus Rising, he describes circuits of the nervous system that imprint at different stages of development. These circuits govern how you interpret safety, belonging, power, language, sexuality, creativity, and symbolic thinking. Each circuit shapes reality in its own way, and each can become flexible or rigid depending on how it was imprinted. When meaning becomes rigid, the reality tunnel narrows. The narrower the tunnel, the more everything appears to confirm the same story about the world. This is why people often feel stuck in repeating patterns. The system keeps generating the same meaning from the same signals. The thinker holds the belief. The prover finds the evidence. And so the world repeats itself. But Wilson's work is not fatalistic. He repeatedly insists that these tunnels are not fixed. They can be expanded, softened, updated, and replaced. The key is awareness. When you begin observing your interpretations as interpretations, you weaken the automatic force behind them. Wilson's use of semantic techniques, including E-prime, supports this point. E-prime is a version of English that removes the verb to be. By doing this, you stop stating your interpretations as absolute features of reality. Instead of saying, "This is bad," you say, "I interpret this as bad," or "This feels bad to me right now." This shifts the meaning from a claim about the world to a description of your experience. It gives the thinker more room to explore alternative interpretations, and it weakens the habit of treating meanings as if they were facts. Wilson believed that this linguistic shift reduces dogmatism, loosens rigid thinking, and encourages flexibility in how we relate to experience. From the perspective of quantum psychology, the mind attaches meaning through processes that resemble selection, reinforcement, and shortcuts shaped by previous learning. The nervous system seeks patterns, and once a pattern becomes familiar, it becomes easier for the mind to categorize new experiences through that pattern. You can see this in how quickly people defend their beliefs, how strongly they respond to challenges, and how often they misinterpret neutral events through old emotional frameworks. Wilson's claim is that meaning is never neutral. Meaning always passes through habits, filters, and emotional histories. This is why two people can encounter the same situation and walk away with completely different interpretations. One may see danger where another sees opportunity. One may see rejection where another sees indifference. One may see insult where another sees a misunderstanding. Wilson would say that these differences do not arise from the situation itself, but from the reality tunnels through which each mind processes the situation. Because these tunnels differ from person to person, subjective meaning differs as well. Think about this. Just by these two different words just mentioned, danger and opportunity, you get interpretations of the same situation that are like night and day. And depending on which one is your interpretation, you will respond very differently to it. In the first interpretation, you will likely run away from it if you can, and face it trembling if you have to, while you, in the other, will face it with curiosity and optimism. As mentioned, Wilson also emphasized the role of neurological imprinting in shaping these tunnels. Early imprints, especially those formed under intense emotion, tend to hold on to the meaning they created at the time. Later experiences are often interpreted through these early filters. The early imprint then becomes a lens that the world must pass through before the mind interprets it. When the early lens is narrow, rigid, or based on outdated conditions, the meaning the mind attaches to current life becomes distorted. This is not a moral issue. It is an issue of outdated programming. The system learned something once, and it assumes that lessons still applies. Wilson believed that freedom begins when you start to notice the difference between what the system learned and what is happening now. Wilson also brings in the idea of signal and noise. A nervous system constantly receives more information than it can process, so it filters out most of it. What it keeps is what it has learned to recognize. This is why reality feels stable. The nervous system selects the same signals and produces the same interpretations. The signals that do not fit the current tunnel are labeled noise and discarded. But sometimes a piece of noise lingers long enough to invite curiosity, and that curiosity can shift an entire reality tunnel. Wilson often encouraged readers to seek out and examine the things they normally dismiss as noise. Doing this expands perception and weakens the automatic production of habitual meaning. This is, in other words, among other things, a call to seek out novelty. Language is another key factor in how the mind attaches meaning. Wilson considered language to be both a tool and a trap. On one hand, language allows us to categorize, communicate, and refine experience. On the other hand, language shapes how we divide the world. Once a word exists for something, the mind begins treating the category as if it were an objective feature of reality. But words are not the things they describe. They are symbols. And when we forget that they are symbols, we confuse our semantic categories with the structure of the world itself. In this sense, meaning becomes a negotiation between language, nervous system imprints, and current signals. The surprising part is that this negotiation is not conscious. It happens automatically. And because it happens automatically, we rarely question the outcomes. It feels as though the meaning was discovered, but Wilson insists it was constructed. Another dimension of this is emotional association. When a situation resembles a past event, we automatically retrieve the old meaning, even if the new situation is different. This is why emotional reactions can feel disproportionate. The mind is not responding to the current moment. It is responding to the stored meaning from a previous moment. Wilson believed that a central step in gaining flexibility is learning to separate the present signals from the meanings that were attached long ago. When this separation becomes possible, the thinker gains the ability to construct new interpretations that match the present rather than the past. What Wilson ultimately offers is a model of meaning as a dynamic process. Meaning changes when interpretation changes. Interpretation changes when awareness interrupts automatic reactions. Awareness grows when you begin observing the mind's operations instead of identifying with them. When you stop assuming that your meaning is the objectively true meaning, you gain access to a wider field of possibilities. The reality tunnel becomes more spacious. The practical effects of this shift are significant. When you stop treating your meanings as facts, you become more flexible, more curious, and less defensive. You stop reacting automatically. You start responding consciously. You realize that you can revise your interpretations in ways that support growth instead of repeating the same emotional patterns. And as the thinker becomes more flexible, the prover follows. It begins finding evidence for new possibilities, new interpretations, and new meanings. When this happens, the world that the nervous system presents begins to expand. Wilson would say that this is not magic. It is the natural result of understanding how the nervous system constructs experience. When you become aware of the process, you gain some influence over it. You can choose a wider frame, a more accurate interpretation, or a meaning that aligns with the life you want to build. You can stop reinforcing patterns that no longer reflect who you are today. And when you do this consistently, the world you experience changes with it. Now, the mind will always attach meaning to reality. That is unavoidable. The real question is whether the meaning is chosen or inherited, conscious or automatic, updated or outdated. And, just as importantly, what motivates the choice? Is it driven by fear, habit, or a sense of duty? Or does it arise from curiosity, openness, love, and expansion? The motive behind the interpretation shapes the quality of the interpretation itself, because the nervous system reinforces whatever emotional state you bring to the moment. According to Wilson, real freedom begins when you recognize that meaning is not imposed by reality. It is produced by the nervous system. When this becomes clear, you start noticing the small but crucial gap between the event and the interpretation your mind wants to attach to it. In that gap, the automatic force of old imprinting loosens. You gain the ability to revise the meaning, choose a wider frame, or respond from a state that reflects who you are now instead of who you were when the old interpretations took hold. That is the point where you stop living inside the reality tunnel you inherited and begin shaping the one you actually want to inhabit. In summary, Wilson's work shows that meaning is never simply found in events. It is created by the nervous system through imprints, language, habits, and emotional memory. What feels objective is usually a familiar interpretation, shaped long before you learn to question anything. Because of this, your reactions often come from past associations rather than present signals. But once you understand that the mind constructs meaning rather than discovers it, a space opens between what happens and the story you attach to it. In that space, you can choose interpretations that are conscious instead of automatic, flexible instead of fixed, and aligned with the life you want to build. That is the freedom Wilson points to. Not escaping meaning, but shaping it deliberately, rather than repeating the meanings you inherited. Finally, let's name it clearly. You have the freedom to choose the meaning you give to reality, to its events, and to your experiences within it. You don't have to accept interpretations that no longer reflect who you are. You don't have to carry meanings that were handed to you before you had the ability to question them. And now you understand the mechanisms in the mind that make those meanings feel automatic and unquestionable. You can see how early imprinting, language, emotion, and habit join together to create interpretations that appear self-evident, even when they come from someone else's frame. This insight reaches farther than a simple shift in attitude. It touches your entire relationship with reality because meaning is the lens through which perception takes place. When the lens changes, the world you experience changes with it. You begin to notice the difference between the event and the story the mind tries to attach to it. You feel the space where a new interpretation can form, one that is chosen, not inherited. And once you recognize that this space exists, you are no longer confined to the reality tunnel you grew up inside. You can revise meanings that limit you. You can choose interpretations that match the life you want to create. You can respond from awareness rather than repetition. That is the shift Wilson points toward, a movement from automatic perception to conscious participation. In the end, the invitation is simple. Watch the meanings your mind produces. Question the ones that tighten your world. Strengthen the ones that expand it. And remember that the map you inherited is not the territory you must walk. The moment you see that clearly, you begin shaping reality, not by force, but by choosing the meaning through which you meet it. Before we go, you are reminded that we are seldom as aware of our inner lives, our experiences, and our responses to them as we think. Therefore, if you want to truly apply what you have learned in this video, you need to develop the habit of observing yourself. It is therefore suggested that you watch our video on self-observation as it is taught within the Fourth Way system, a path of awakening through awareness and inner work in daily life. You can find a link to it on the end screen right now, together with the aforementioned video on mentalism and a playlist with other videos on Wilson's works. You've now reached the end of the video. Remember to like and subscribe. Thank you for your time.